How do you create pagination on your website? So pagination is this idea of loading a small subset of the total amount of items or results you have on a page to improve load time. Let's say you have a database, you might have 1,000 or millions of items in it, and you don't really want to load them all up front on your website because that's going to cause a really slow website. It's going to give a bad user experience. Instead, we load a small subset at a time and allows the user to browse more if they're looking to fetch more items, right? So let's take a look at how we do this. We're going to use Toddle and we're going to use Supabase on the back end. But the basic ideas here are going to be the same pretty much no matter what technology you use, right? So I've already set up a Supabase API on the back end. So I'm going to connect to it from Toddle here. So I'm choosing Supabase as a new service. And right here, I can click this little nice link here, which opens up my settings page in Supabase, and I can click my demo project I'm going to use. And then I can copy the project URL, which is the first part we need for Toddle here. And I can copy my anon key, it's called. That's the second part, right? So now it's going to check that the connection is correct. I'm going to say OK. And now we have a Supabase service set up, and we can start browsing all the different endpoints from that. What we want today is this list of countries. And we can see we're getting back a list of all these different items with their name, some different short country codes, etc., and a bunch of different things, right? I can see this quite a lot here as a total number of results. So it's kind of perfect for what we're trying to show, right? One thing I want to do is I want to sort it first, because right now it seems seemingly randomly sorted. So we can go into parameters. And when you add Supabase as a service, it actually gets a lot, like Toddle grabs a lot of information about that endpoint. So you can kind of see how it works here. So let's go down and we can say there's one here that says order. And then we just say name. And that lets us order all the items by name, like this, right? The next thing we want to do is, because we're showing, we want to paginate, we only want to show a small subset of results, right? So we want to limit the amount of results coming back. And we can do that with another query parameter in Supabase called limit. And let's say we just say 10, right? Now, if you're not using Supabase, if you're using some other service or backend, these things will change a little bit. Like you might not be the same query params for ordering, sorting, limiting, right? They often have different names. Skip limit is usually limit, but you might have skip to skipping result. You might have different like sort instead of order. It really does depend on the backend. There are standards, but there's basically no rules, right? So every backend kind of make up their own mind, right? So for Supabase, this is the right value. You'll have to figure out what it is if you're using another service. So now we've got this, and we can scroll down and see that we're getting 9 is the last result. And because we're starting at 0, that means we get exactly those 10 results. And it's the first 10 because they're all sorted alphabetically. Now, technically, this letter right here, the A with a little circle above, in Scandinavia is O, and it's the last letter in the alphabet. But this was sorted based on an English alphabet. So we'll allow it. We'll allow it for now. Now that we fetched all the data, let's go and add them to our page, right? So I'm gonna insert a list here. Actually, before I do that, I think I'm gonna change the styling to be something a little bit more light. And in this case, I don't want it. There we go, right? And so here I want to repeat this list item, and I'm gonna use the countries and data, right? And then I'm getting my 10 results here, and I can go and change the text and say the formula here should be the name, right? So now we got repeated all 4, and we're looking at the name, right? So far, so good. Now, there's a nice little service called Flag CDN that I like to use. It's basically an image service that offers all the different flags, images of them, in different sizes. Let's say we want to do 80 by 60. Maybe we go a little bit lower, actually. 40 by 30. That's 60 by 45. That's a good in between, right? And so what the service does is you can sort of call it with this URL here. You can see There's the base service, then there's the size 60x45. And then here we have the country code.png, right? So this whole URL here is the URL for the image. And here they sort of add an HTML image tag. So we're just going to copy that like that, copy. And I'm just going to put that in, paste that in here, right? And it's going to, do you want to import some HTML? I do want to import some HTML. And I'll move that up to the top. We will change the layout a bit. Give it 16 pixels of spacing. Pretty good. Now the image is always just saying like Ukraine. Let's go and change the attributes. We don't need that one. We don't need the source set. That's for loading dynamically different sizes. We don't need that. Let's go and start with the source. So what we're seeing here is we have like a long string, and we know that everything up until 60x45, we want to keep that because all the flags should be the same. But we're going to take away the ua.png and replace that based on what country we're currently showing, right? We'll start by cutting that away. We'll say concat. And then here I want to add in my item, the current repeat item, and then the ISO2 because it was a 2-letter code. And then after that, we'll add .png. And we can see that actually doesn't work in most places. And I think that's because this is an uppercase. These are uppercase letters, and it probably doesn't like that. So let's try making the lowercase. And it worked. So now we got all our flags as well as our names, right? They seem to be a bit small because I think we're on a big display. Let's try and say, what happens if we say 30 by, what is that? Figure it out yourself. Great, we'll just move that and it'll do itself. Okay, so here we get a little bit better. It looks a bit better on a big screen, right? Okay, so we've got all our images, we've got all our countries, we've got it all set up. We're limiting. Now we need to go and figure out how to do the pagination, right? So in order to do that, what we actually want to do is we want to do a long list of numbers down here with the current, with all the different pages. And when you click one of them, it's going to go to that page, right? So I'm going to add another list. And here we're going to have like, whoops, 1, right? And then we'll add a few more. Like that's the idea, right? 2, 3, right? And this should, of course, be this way. And here we are, right? So this, we'll have all these pages. You click one of them, and then it'll go to that one, right? So in order to do that, in order to actually change what page we're on, and when I say page, just to be clear, if there's any mistake, in toddle, this is a page, but it can have different type of parameters up here. And normal, we say when it's applied with different parameters, normally on the web, we talk about different pages. So in this case, it's a different page with result, but it's the same page in toddle that powers all of it, right? It's just dynamic content. So what we want to do here is we want to add a way to keep track of what page we're on first. And we're going to do that inside our page object here. The reason for that is that means that if we're, it'll be part of the URL. So if we go to a new page and then we copy that URL cell to a coworker and say, hey, look, did you know there was a place called like Denmark? They can go, oh yeah, sure there is. Because they'll see exactly the same results as we do, right? That's the point, right? So we'll do here, we'll say page, test value will be 1. And now that we're doing that, we can actually add that to our API, right? We'll add the links to this afterwards and figure that out, but let's start by adding this to the URL. So I'm going to add a new parameter, and I'm going to say page, but it doesn't have one of those because, unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. Like most APIs done. Sometimes they work in pages, but normally they work in items. So we already had a limit which says take 10 of these items. And the other thing we now need to set is offset. And offset is basically saying skip this amount. It's often called skip. In this case, it's called offset because, again, it depends on the backend. So we need to know how many items are we skipping before we take the next 10 that's going to pay it. And then that number of items is essentially the page we're on times the limit, like how many, right? So we'll go and say page, and when we're using a query parameter like this, we're going to say default to, because, oops, there we are, because it might not be set. When we just go to the page, there isn't going to be one. So we can't like do math on it, but we can default it back to 1. And then we can also make sure that it's always a number, because when it's part of the URL, it's generally considered a string, right? So this is the current page, and then we multiply that by 10, which was the number of items per page, right? And you'll probably notice here that for page 1, it shouldn't actually be offset by 10. It should show the first 10. So we're going to add -1. And now we actually got the formula for showing this, right? So the number of items we should skip is the current page -1 times the number of items per page, right? That's the logic we're working with. And this seems to work just fine, right? So now we could go here. Let's go and say we're going to add, insert a link here, move this down. And then here I'm going to say attribute. And so before we'll fix out actually loading the right number later, but let's just get working with the first 3 pages, and then we can figure out how we render the exact number of pages last, right? So right now I've got this link, and I want to make sure it points to the right URL so it updates the page correctly. And when I add the href here, which is the location, the URL it should go to, I don't actually need to give the whole URL. If I only give the last half of it or last part of it, it will just keep the rest the same. So if I do, I can say concatenate, and then I can say, well, let's try that again, concatenate. And then I can say page equals, because that's the param we just created. And then here we'll do, well, we'll just say 1 here, right? 1. Then this is going to point to 1. I didn't need to concatenate that, but I do need it in a second, so it's fine, I have it, right? So now if we did the same thing for 2, right? Here I would say 2 instead, and have the sort of same thing going on. Let's get rid of this one. Let's go and test this to see that it actually works. Like now we just have the first 2 pages, right? So if I click 1, nothing happens because I'm going to the same page. If I click 2, I'm going to be on page 2 loading the second set of results, and I can go back to 1 again, right? Okay, that works. Now let's get to the funky part. We need to figure out how many pages do we actually have here, right? Because we can't just guess. It doesn't make sense to list like 17 pages if there's only 2. It doesn't make sense only to list 2 if there's actually 17. So we need to find the right amount of pages. Now this will differ a little bit based on your backend again, because we basically need to get that information from your server. There's no way for us to, let's do here. There's no way for us to actually know how many records there are and how many pages to do without the server telling us, because it is only sending us a small subset. So if it sends us 10 results, right, because it's 1 page, that doesn't mean there's 10 in total. So we need to get that number some other way. In Supabase, they actually do a really clever little thing where they use headers to pass it along. Normally headers for request are metadata, most of it for the browser. So there's some, in this case, some Cloudflare caching information around. What kind of compression and coding the data is. A bunch of stuff that the browser reads and uses to pass this stuff. But they added this little one, content range. And content range here actually says I'm showing results 0 to 9 out of star. So we almost got the data we need, except that star here isn't really helpful. The reason why we're getting a star from Supabase is by default, Supabase doesn't count the results, because then it doesn't need to spend resources on that if you don't need it. So you kind of have to ask for it. And you do that by adding a header, which is the prefer header, to count equals, what is it, estimated, like that, right? Estimated here means we don't actually care if it's 100% accurate, we just want close enough. And that allows the Supabase and Postgre, the database behind it, to do it much, much faster, right? Counting millions of rows takes a while, but if you just need close enough, it can actually use sort of cache data and guesstimation to give you a very close result. And that's good enough for us. So now let's look at the headers here. And now we can see in our content range that we're getting 0 to 9 out of 249 now. So now we actually have the information. Great. But of course, it's in a header and it's in string format, so we need to fix that first. I'm going to create a new formula, call it number of results. And we are going to take our countries, response, headers, find this content range. And now this is a string and we only want the part after the slash. So we can split by the slash. And here, then we take the last bit and then we're doing number, right? Converting it to a number, because if we want to do math on it, it needs to be a number. Now that we have the total number of results, the next step is to find out how many pages. And so just like the offset was kind of the current page times limit, the total number of pages is essentially the total number of results divided by how many results on each page, right? So let's go and do that. We'll call it number of pages. And that will be our number of results divided by 10, which was our limit or number of results per page. And now we can see we get a sort of off number. So we are going to round up to get to 25, right? So now we have the number of results. We got the number of pages we need to list. Now we not just need to display them. I'm going to go and we actually can delete the second one. Then we're going to repeat the first one here. And since whenever you repeat in toddle, you need an array. You can't like repeat to a number. We need to create an array first, and we can do that with a range formula. And we're going to say the minimum value, because we don't want to show 0, because the minimum value, the first page, we call it 1 in our system, right? It's index 0 in the array, but we're going to call it page 1. And then we're going to get all the way to number of pages. That's the maximum, right? And so now we can see we have an array just of numbers that goes up to 25, right? And we now get all 25 pages listed here. So now in my text here, I can go swap that out with a formula that just says item, because it's just numbers. And then in the link here, I can go and change this formula. And instead of just saying 1, again, I'm going to say item, right? So now each of these are just pointing to a different page, right? The last thing I want to do with this is I want to fix the styling a bit. Let's start with just inheriting, getting like a neutral color. Actually, just add a little bit of gap here because that bothers me. There we do. And also, there we go, right? It's a little bit nicer. But the other thing is I want to show which one is the selected page, right? So we can do that. We can take this list item. We're going to add an attribute, a class specifically called current. And the formula here is if the item, which is the current page this repeat item is equals to page, which should default to 0. Oh, sorry, default to 1, of course. And it should be a number. Now, if that's true, that means if it's page 1, if it's not set, it's going to default to page 1. Otherwise, it's going to take whatever the page parameter is, convert it to a number, and verify that it matches the current list item, right? Now that we've done that, we can start styling it. So we're going to say style, current. I'm just going to change the color to a blue. Oh, it's behind my head. Sorry. There we go. To a nice blue 600. That works. There we go. Right. So now we can see currently page 1 is the active one. Let's go and check out the preview. We're on page 1. Let's try page 2. All right. Page 3, 4, 17, 20. It works. All right, so here we have our pagination. We can see every time we click, we update that page parameter as well because we're loading a new page and we're getting a nice next set of results, right? That's pretty much it. Obviously, there's a lot of places you could take this. You could, maybe you decide that you don't want to show all 25 in large numbers. You want to remove some of them, only display a subset. You could add next previous buttons. There's a whole bunch of things you can do with this. You can really make it your own, but the basic concept here is always going to be the same. You're going to figure out how many pages do I have and which one's the current one, how do I load the next set? And you always do that by passing this information into the API, right? So I hope this was helpful. I hope you can use this in your application. If you like this, make sure to subscribe, like for more content. And if you haven't tried Toddle yet, go and give it a go. It makes building things like this so easy and so much fun. Thank you very much.